Hello and welcome to The Current Thing with me, Nick Dixon, and this is a very special episode coming to you from the ARC conference, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, which is a kind of based version of Davos started by Jordan Peterson and others. And we have an appropriately special guest, the author of Don't Burn This Book and Don't Burn This Country, host of the Rubin Report. It is, of course, Mr. Dave Rubin. Thanks for doing the show, Dave.
It's my pleasure. I like based version of Davos. That is what this is. This is, I would also say, a deconstruction of the World Economic Forum, perhaps.
Right, the anti-WEF.
Yeah.
Well, how have you found it so far? I've kind of rocked up late. I'm just here for the last party, really. It's kind of the kind of thing I do. But how have you found it? What are your main takeaways from the conference?
Well, I've been doing a lot of what you're doing right now, which is interviewing people right outside the main stage over here. So I haven't been in the main room a lot, but the theme of the conference really is how can the West renew our ability to tell a story? Some people are saying tell a new story. I don't know that we need a new story. I think we have to return to a timeless story that was the foundational idea of what Western civilization is, which is based, of course, in the value of the individual and individual rights and human flourishing and liberty. And I would also connect that to laissez-faire economics and a live and let live attitude that is not perfectly, let's say, libertarian, but picks the spots where societies have to draw limits and say, okay, we can have this set of ideas in, but not this set of ideas. Really reconfigure everything that the West has, I would say, gotten very close to losing right now, and it's becoming increasingly obvious. So it's been interesting because, obviously with the events of the last couple of weeks, since October 7th and what happened in Israel, I think that there are more people in the West that have suddenly awoken to the fact that there's a real problem, and it's not a problem that exists just in the Middle East. That is a geopolitical problem, but it's a problem with what has happened with all of our institutions, with what we all call wokeness that has infected almost every layer of Western society. And what Jordan, who set this up, Jordan Peterson, has tried to do over the last couple of years is empower the individual. How do you want to live your life? Maybe you have some autonomy over that. Maybe if you put a little skin in the game, you can fix things. Yeah. I think that's the right answer. And it is the anti-WEF version, because the WEF version is, we are up here. We're the layer up here. We will tell you how to live. And what Jordan and the rest of the speakers here are trying to formulate is a better way of looking at the world where it's us on the bottom, and then we build structures this way. And I think that's much better for human flourishing.
Right, yeah, that's the responsibility part. He thought it's the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. And he spoke in his opening speech about responsibility, take what you can from this and build something. I mean, is there a danger that we're all just talking? I've heard this thing a lot recently, we're just talking on our side and panels and interviews like this, and I'm guilty of it, obviously, whereas we should be building. But do you think this is an example of actually that it is building by having a conference like this?
Yes. Look, the talking thing, I talk for a living, I interview people for a living, so talking is good to an extent, right? You have to talk about things so that you can churn through ideas, so you can make cogent arguments, but that in and of itself is not enough. Of course, you then need to put action to that. I would say this conference, it's fairly obvious to me, and if you just look at the list of people that are here, the politicians and former politicians and industry leaders and journalists and philanthropists and everybody else, these are people that are now trying to build the next institution. So you don't just go from sort of the end of one system, which is kind of where we're at right now, to immediately building the next system. You have to talk about it. You have to figure it out. And and the idea that the main notion is to power the citizen is very different than everything we're being sold in the West right now, whether it's the World Economic Forum with that layer here, but whether it's listening to the CDC as to whether you should go outside because of a cold, or whether it's listening to any of our institutions, our educational institutions, on whether you know what gender you are just because you were born a certain way. We've done so many things backwards that we need to build, and I'm a builder. As you know, I started Locals.com, a tech company in the face of tech censorship. So I'm a firm believer. You talk about things for a while, and then you build. I suspect the building phase will be pretty close to the heels of what's happening right here.
Yeah, because that's sort of the responsibility part, and there's also the alliance part. Because I was thinking, why this name, Alliance for Responsible Citizenship? The alliance part is where we've sort of gone a bit wrong on our side. Not wrong, but you notice the sort of left, and you all know this obviously, they're always like on one page, they move at once, they all seem to get the same memo downloaded like the Borg or something. They just seem to, whereas we're sort of like, oh, we're individuals and all this. Do you think the alliance part is really key, that we've actually got to fight back together?
Well, it is key because you're right. If you take an ideology that is based in collectivism, it's easier to wrangle people. You know, the old joke is if you go to a libertarian conference, you know, for 2 minutes they talk about taxes, and then for 5 hours they talk about whether driver's licenses should be legal or not. And by the way, those conversations can be intellectually fun to have, but they don't get you. They don't get you anywhere, really. The alliance part, in essence, that you can't wrangle these people. It's like wrangling cats when you take a whole bunch of people that are obsessed with the individual. But what it is that it starts with the individual, and then you need alliances, then you need communities, then you need institutions. So again, if you build those things bottom up, I think you'll do a better job at defending, ironically, I suppose, defending the individual. But it has to start with the individual, not a sort of nameless, shapeless organization that says you will own nothing and you will be happy. How about I will own what I earn and then perhaps I will be happy? But of course, as Jordan would say, the goal shouldn't be happiness, the goal should be purpose. And then you might find a little happiness on the side.
Yeah. Jordan and Andrew Tate aligned on that issue. Don't look for happiness, just look for purpose. So, and do you take some credit from the whole intellectual dark web era? Was that the kind of acorn that grew this massive conference? You
know, it's funny. It's been nice the last couple of days because so many people who at that time sat in my garage, that's where my studio was, and we built what became known as the IDW, and it was an accident. It really was. I just thought there's something wrong with the world. Let me talk to these people, and they happen to be Canadian psychology professors like Jordan, and they happen to be evolutionary biologists like Brett Weinstein, and they happen to be political talkers like Ben Shapiro. But what people responded to was that we disagreed on a wide variety of things, whether it was abortion or gay marriage or taxation, literally the entire milieu of what you might disagree with in a Western society. And we did it respectfully. We didn't have a problem doing what we're doing right now. I could sit with someone, Dennis Prager, who's here, for example, and we debated the death penalty. And at the end, his wife came over and we broke bread. And that's what civilizations that are going to survive are going to have to do. Yeah. They're going to have to be able to have those conversations. So in a weird way, this has been very rewarding for me because I'm seeing so many of those old people, so many of those old guests on my show, former guests, and we're all kind of realizing, wait, we're back together again. The band's back together. Right. Maybe there's something new that we can traverse here, and that's really what ARC is. Mm.
Yeah, and you've still got those differences, I suppose. You're probably still anti-death penalty, I'm guessing. Crazy.
I've shifted a little bit on certain things,
okay.
Economics specifically for me,
okay.
But that's the point. That's the point. You should be able to sit down with people and discuss these things.
Okay, we're trying to bring you over to the pro-death side, but you're still okay. But the point is, we still have all these differences, but something brings us together. And you a couple of years ago, I think you said it's basically now conservative versus woke. Is that how you see it, pretty much?
It's a simplistic way of putting things, but I think it's in some respects it's woke with this bizarro sort of Islamist thing now that they've been coupled. It's that versus everybody else. It's not libertarians versus liberals. It's not the Labor Party, although here I suppose the Labor Party has become somewhat radical. It's shifted a little bit more center, I guess. But it's not Republicans versus Democrats anymore. It's not liberals versus conservatives. Right. That would be a healthy fight to have, meaning a conservative set of principles. We believe in tradition and we're trying to stay the course. And an old liberal that might say, okay, but we think there's a little more utility of the state. That was the debate that we had in America, really since 1900. And it was a healthy debate to have. And you could pick your side on it. I could pick my side. And we could break bread after. Now it's become something very different. It's the woke ideology, which in essence is equity over equality, which is antithetical to freedom and human ingenuity, and it's antithetical to everything that a human being is supposed to be for. The idea is you're born, go get something, get out there and go make it happen. Equity is the idea we're going to keep taking from those guys, we're going to give to you until we're all equal. Of course, what they never tell you is that elite class we were talking about earlier, they're always going to be above all of us. So when I say conservative these days, I don't mean conservative that you have to be a religious conservative and be absolutely pro-life and be totally for the death penalty or whatever the checklist of things that are thought to be conservative. What I mean by conservative is if you believe, let's say from an American perspective, that America is fundamentally good, that our founding documents are fundamentally good, that the importance of the individual and then the family is the building block of a strong society, well, then we can talk about all of the other stuff. We can talk about social programs. We can talk about all of the other issues that come down the line when you're having presidential politics. So yes, in essence, I think the way to view it, it's woke. It's not liberal versus conservative. I would say it's woke with now this odd Islamist connection versus, I would say, modern conservative.
Okay, so you mentioned this odd Islamist connection, which I was going to ask you about, because who is going to win the culture war or PR battle between woke and Israel? This is how I put it, because as you said, this changes the game a bit. We saw when the horrific attacks happened October 7th, the sort of true face of decolonization, because we had people, well, in this country, someone from Novara Media called Rivka Brown was saying, this is a day of celebration. And you're going, well, and people are looking at this going, this are people celebrating rape and murder. It's like, this doesn't seem like an academic issue anymore. So you see what they're being like. We have demonstrations all around London, 100,000 pro-Palestinian people on the street, very aggressive stuff. People calling for jihad as the only solution, all kinds of stuff going on. People ripping down posters of kidnapped hostages and so on. And what I'm wondering is, at first you thought, okay, now we're going to win some ground because this is so obviously horrific. But then it sort of shifted back the other way. And I noticed we're in trouble when hot girls on Instagram are posting pro-Palestine stuff. That's become the black square, the BLM. So are you concerned about this woke versus, what I'm calling woke versus Israel?
Right. Well, of course I'm concerned about it because it's becoming the civilizational battle. But what I would say within that, although we're not to the silver lining portion of this just yet, and I have to say as an American being here in London, and driving past one of those rallies yesterday, it's deeply depressing and disturbing, and I can only imagine how I would feel if I lived in London and that was happening in my city. I live in the free state of Florida. We're a little less tolerant of this stuff within the confines of the law, obviously. I would say the silver lining is that, and you sort of alluded to this, the average person, maybe who's apolitical or sort of you just kind of lean left because that's the way the culture is, the average person knows the difference between right and wrong. You have a very deeply brainwashed group of young people for sure, and then you have the Islamists and the true Marxists, let's say, who are using them. The average person knows that whatever your political beliefs are, you cannot behead children, you cannot shoot point blank Holocaust survivors and kidnap kids and the litany of other horrible things. So I think they've pushed so far that they have woke up a certain set of people. They're going to be very quiet for a while. It's not that they're just going to be out there and suddenly electing the right politicians or any of that, but there's been some level of an awakening. And I would also say that the very idea of intersectionality, which is what led us to this, the idea that, you know, if you're black, you're oppressed, and if you're trans, you're oppressed, and somehow if you're a Gazan, you're oppressed, that somehow if you can combine those oppressions, you have a strong warrior to fight the power. It's a completely nonsensical idea. It's just not right. I think we're relatively the same age. You know, the Transformers back in the 80s, they had the Constructicons, and it was 4 or 5 trucks that all combined to form Devastator. He was a much more big, powerful machine. That's what they thought that they were creating, but in essence, they created something with very weak bones. The Islamists are not going to be very tolerant of the trans people when push comes to shove. Gays for Palestine is very different than Palestine for gays.
Yeah, the queers are for Palestine, but Palestine's not for the queers, as I've heard it said. I'm amazed you managed to bring that back to Transformers. That is impressive.
Yeah, pretty good, huh?
Yeah, that is my era.
I'll see if I can get a G.I. Joe reference in here. I'll give you a sec.
What about, and has liberalism failed? Because you've spoken in the past about, I think it was in an Unheard interview, you said that it seems that you can use any of the tools of liberalism to rationalize with the monster that's coming to burn your house down. And we've seen that liberals have no defense over this, which is why all liberal institutions are crumbling. And Carl Benjamin put up a similar sort of post a couple of days ago, maybe yesterday, saying, talking about the pre-political revulsion of what we're seeing in London. And he was saying that liberalism has caused people to come in who basically hate our whole way of life, it sounds a bit right when people have come in, but this is what's happened. And he's saying we have no way of stopping this because they're citizens, as long as they're not doing anything technically illegal. You said in Florida they could be a bit tougher. But can liberalism, I mean, you call yourself probably a conservative now, perhaps rather than a liberal, but is this just a failure of liberalism that it allows its own destruction?
It's a difficult conclusion for me to come to, and I had Carl Benjamin on the show in my house in Florida just a couple of weeks ago, and we discussed this, and we've both come to a similar conclusion, which is, I suppose, ironic or obvious, because we were both, 7 or 8 years ago, the guys that were championing classical liberalism. I think what the woke did is they weaponized liberalism against itself, and you have to give them credit for that. We can mock them all day long and say that they're purple-haired weirdos and all of this stuff, but they did something very nefarious, and they did it on our watch, and that's just the truth, and it's a depressing reality. What they did was they saw that liberals, from a let's say a British and an American perspective, liberals, if you were looking at the hierarchy of importance, put tolerance at the top of the hierarchy. Tolerance is good, but it cannot be the top of the hierarchy. It cannot be the pinnacle of your important, the issues that you care about. It's got to be about 3 orders down. You have to care about the individual, you have to care about family, borders perhaps, and then you can say tolerance. Be tolerant of the people who are a little bit different than you. Be tolerant of people who look a different color or maybe express their love in a way that is different than you, something like that. But liberals said, no, we will allow everybody into the party. And anyone who's ever been to a party knows you don't want to let everybody into a party. Anyone who owns a house knows that you have a door for a reason. You discriminate on who you welcome to your home for a dinner party. And liberalism, unfortunately, that soft underbelly was exposed. And I would say in most cases now, it's not that liberalism is not worth fighting for. It absolutely is. But I would say in most cases, conservatives, ironically, are making a better case for liberalism than the liberals are.
Right, yeah, interesting. Yeah, because Andrew Doyle still thinks liberalism is the way, we just need to properly defend it and assert it, whereas people like Carl Benjamin say, no, it's flawed because it believes in the citizen of anywhere, this anywhere man which proves to be false, and we need a kind of more Scrutonian kind of primacy of place, primacy of family, like you said. Yeah, and I lean more towards the second one because I wonder what we can do. Because I was talking to Toby Young about it on my other podcast, and he was saying, well, we can't just do mass deportations. I was saying, well, we've at the very least got to cut immigration, and we've got to be more robust about defending our values. But I mean, is it what can we actually do? I mean, there's conferences like this, but we can't stop. We can try and persuade the academic people who are brainwashed, the decolonization people, the young people who've just been brainwashed. We can't really persuade the person on the street screaming about jihad, so I don't know, how do we...
Well, I don't know why you can't do mass deportation. Of course you can do mass deportation, but you have to have the will to do it. Now, I think what a liberal would say in that case is, well, you want to do everything you can to make sure you're not infringing on someone's free speech. So, first off, I would say you have to make a distinction between a non-citizen who is here at these protests calling for jihad or violence or whatever, and then the Brit who is legally here, who is getting as close to calling for violence and terrorism as you possibly can under the confines of the law. But there's no, I've heard other people say it, it's not just you, well, we can't deport these people. Well, you can, you have to have the will to do it. You have to have enough people that say Britain is worth fighting for and Britain should remain British. I don't mean Britain should remain white any more than saying Israel should remain white. Half of Israel are Sephardic Jews that are as brown as anyone else in the Middle East. So it's not about skin color, it's about culture and a set of ideas. And if they in essence are weaponizing all of the freedoms to commit hara-kiri, and it would best not be done. Let's put it this way. Who do you think is more indigenous to the land? The Jews to the ancient land of Israel, where Jesus of Nazareth was from, and where the story of Hanukkah took place in what's now known as the West Bank, but is the Judean hills, or the people who are screaming for jihad in London? I think the answer is fairly obvious.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, I've been attacked for people saying, Nick, you can't attack people or deport them for liking a flag. But it's not the Palestine flag. But if you're going around with the Hamas flag, that's a flag that says you want to eliminate everyone in the country, our whole way of life. So I think that's pretty reasonable. But anyway, the pro-Palestine, obviously because of the bombing and war, and no one wants innocent citizens to be killed. It's, you get into this debate. But anyway, I'm largely with you on this. Maybe I want to quickly ask you, because I haven't got that much time, about the American situation, because you're kind of Team DeSantis, if I'm right. You're down there in Florida, and you're not really Team Trump anymore. Although, I mean, Trump did move the embassy famously to Jerusalem, very kind of pro-Israel. So DeSantis perhaps a bit more neocon, maybe. Trump more like as used deterrence, and we seem to have like peace on the top just because of his scary tweets or whatever it was that did it.
Sure.
I mean, why do you lean with DeSantis rather than Trump? At
Yeah.
this point?
Well, first off, people say that DeSantis may lean more neocon. I don't see any evidence of that. I think he's actually, ironically, I would say DeSantis is more America first than Trump is at this point. That's not to denigrate any of the good things Trump did. I very proudly voted for him the last time, and if he's the nominee, I absolutely will vote for him. Look, if Trump ends up my president and DeSantis remains my governor, if that's the end of all of this, that'll be a hell of a lot better than we have right now. So that's worth noting. But to specifically address what you said, I lived in California during COVID, where we had some of the most draconian lockdowns in the world. It's a high tax state. It's a state that does not believe in law and order, a state where you are punished if you defend your life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, a state where drugs are rampant in Los Angeles and San Francisco and everywhere else. I fled, and the beauty of our federalist system is I didn't have to flee America. I could flee to Florida because we have a different set of laws there. We believe in law and order, and we believe in low taxes. And we have done the right things to facilitate a flourishing for the people of that state. So I think DeSantis, who's also 45 years old, he won in a massive landslide. He's proven that you can bring liberals over to become Republicans. Before DeSantis was governor, there were about 400,000 more registered Democrats than Republicans in Florida. The Republicans now have 900,000 more Republicans than Democrats. That's 1.3 million people that have swung. That's not only because he strengthened the Republican Party with the base, he brought in liberals, the liberals from New York, the liberals from Cali, me, my whole team, many of them are here today, are first-time Republican voters in the state of Florida. Okay. So DeSantis, to me, represents the future of the Republican Party. And I think, honestly, I believe that he would instill a lot of the things that you just mentioned there that are Trump's great credits of his foreign policy. I don't see any reason to think that they would be any different with DeSantis. I actually think they might be a little more slim and trim and effective.
And presumably you don't buy into the charisma argument that, I've never met DeSantis, but Trump has his famous, amazing charisma, and, that's a big factor in politics, whether we like it or not. DeSantis is known as the policy guy, Trump's the charisma guy. Does that bother you?
Well, it's not that I don't buy into it. I would prefer in a perfect world that we didn't care as much about charisma and we cared more about policy. That this is a guy who has said, these are the things I'm going to do. He's done all of them. He doesn't lie. I mean, if you could try to come up with the biggest lie of DeSantis, nobody knows what it is. What's his biggest failure? Nobody knows what it is. What are the things he's accomplished? Well, I can lay out about 20 of them for you in no time. What I would say is, we don't live in that world. We live in a world where charisma does matter and the television presence does matter. I suspect as we get closer to January, when we have the first primaries, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, I think things are going to look very, very different than what the polls are showing right now. I might be wrong. I can fully grant you that. It is not in our business. It's not great to be doing predictions because you just don't know. But I do not believe Donald Trump is up by 50 points. I simply do not. Everywhere I go, almost everyone that I've talked to here, everybody loves DeSantis. Most of them, or a good portion of them, voted for Trump last time, and they thank him. It's interesting. I've been frustrated with Trump on a few things related to DeSantis, how he's gone after DeSantis specifically in Florida related to COVID. But I give credit to Trump, a huge amount of credit. He broke something that needed to be broken. But that doesn't mean he has to be the once and future king. I think there's a better chance right now, and hopefully we go to that. Maybe we will not, and we'll see.
So the one argument for Trump is the narrative of Trump that they're trying to put him in prison, and maybe in some version of it he wins from prison or something, or maybe less extreme than that. But in a way that's an argument for Trump in itself, the fact that he's so persecuted that symbolically it needs to be Trump. But do you buy into that? And secondly, how concerned are you about the persecution of political opponents as we see with Trump right now?
Well, on the first part, I can do that fairly quickly. The story that you just laid out there, what has become the sort of meta story about Trump, this persecuted person who the election was stolen from, and they've treated him horribly with these cases, which I completely agree with, by the way, and it's selective prosecution, all that. That is a compelling story. And when you talk about that and personality, that is a very compelling rocket fuel to give a candidate to go forward. Sorry, one more time, the second part.
And the second point is...
about persecutions in general.
Yeah, how much
it's deeply dangerous. It's unbelievably dangerous. I wish we had more liberals standing up against this selective prosecution right now. You do not have to like Donald Trump, respect Donald Trump, anything. But you better beware that if we are going to jail former presidents, if we are going to start going after the taxes of political dissidents and the litany of things that we have done or can do, no one will run for office anymore. We will scare the bejesus out of everybody, and we will end up in a banana republic. And history shows us that quite clearly.
Okay, and because we've got to go in a minute, maybe I'll ask a big question. Maybe we kind of started with it, but how do you think we win this culture war thing, assuming we're on the same side, presuming we are because we're here, and presuming it is a war, which I think it is, how do we win this thing?
How do we win it? Well, look, the theme of this conference is how do we tell a better story? The left has a great story. It's not a true story, but it's a great story. You're oppressed, they're the oppressors, let's burn the thing down. You can do it easily, you can do it concisely and everything else. Again, it's not true, but it's clear. A better story is you need to be empowered. You need to be empowered to live your life as you see fit. And if you can do that, if we can create the conditions so that you could find the work that you want to find, build the family that you want to build, live in a community that is with like-minded people that can thrive and not just survive but thrive, that's a story. But it's a little more complex. It's a little more nuanced. It's going to take more work. It's very, very easy to burn things down. The left has been extraordinarily good at that. They've burned down all of our institutions. They've burned down so much of what generations well before us fought for to free us from tyranny. They've burned it down and started to bring back the tyranny. We have to tell that story better, and I think that's the purpose of this conference. I think it's why Jordan, particularly as a communicator, has become... I have no problem saying I believe he is a modern day prophet, that he is communicating something beneath the political layer, beneath the cultural layer, beneath the media layer. He is telling us something very deeply true that is very hard to get across, and nobody does it better than him. And if we can all start aiming towards that thing, we can get out of this, but it is not going to be easy.
Okay, awesome. I'm just checking the time. Pretty much done, I guess. We done? All right, great answer to finish on. Where can people find you these days, Dave?
RubinReport.locals.com. I have left the rails of the, not left, I have defended myself against the rails of big tech censorship, and that's the direct way to get to me and my audience, and make sure that big tech is not stopping you from seeing the show.
All right, thanks so much for doing it, Dave.
Hey, it was my pleasure.
Good to see you.